Hi, everyone. Welcome to Every Angle, where we break down the strategies and market moves that actually matter. I'm Jen Hannon of HMH Marketing, and I'm joined today by Andy Mann. He's a former analyst, CTO, and product leader at tech companies like Splunk, CA Technologies. And today we're going to explore how analyst relations are evolving, what's actually worth your budget, and how you get real value from the analyst ecosystem. Andy, it's so nice to have you. Would love to get a little more of your background.
Hey, Jen, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. This is really important content. I love the area you're giving your audience advice on, and I just hope I can help a little. I've had a lot of engagement in this space. Initially as an end user, using analyst reports as IT operations to try and figure out what to do and how to do it. I bought and installed and deployed multiple different systems using analyst reports as some level of guidance for me. Subsequently went into the vendor world, and as you say, a CPO, a CTO, working from the vendor side, working with analysts variously on communications, on product and other things. I subsequently have actually been an analyst myself. So I was with Enterprise Management Associates for 5 years. They're running their IT operations and data center management practice. I subsequently did my own analyst business, Sageable, for a couple of years until recently. So I've had a lot of insight into this. I've had a lot of experience on all sides of the equation. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yes, I think so too. I love you have all of the angles, every single perspective, not just one, which is great. You don't often find that. And we do have one thing in common. Well, we have many things in common, but one of the main things we have in common is we used to be competitive swimmers. Totally out of, not analyst relations, but I think it's always fun when you connect with somebody and you have something like that in common.
I know, right? Finally, at my ripe old age, I can be excited for my 27-2 backstroke 50.
That's great. I love it. I love it. Well, let's dive right in. Let's talk high level. Let's talk about what is the value of working with analysts. I have clients that are all in because they've seen success. Others that are like, I hate this, but what's the real value there?
Yeah, look, there's actually a lot of great value from good analyst relations. And it's not all good, but we'll get to that maybe. But when you're talking with analysts, they've got a lot of perspective, a lot of insights. They do talk to a lot of different people. They get a lot of different learning. So when you're talking from a marketing or a product perspective, one of the things I love about working with analysts is market sensing, understanding what your customers and maybe more importantly, what your prospects need to know and what they're feeling about your systems and software, what they're doing, what they're buying, why they're not buying. They will tell analysts things they will not tell you as a product leader, for example. Even good customers won't always give you the unvarnished truth the same way they will to the analyst community. And so initially, definitely working with analysts on things like product planning, feature sensing, market acceptance, competitive intelligence. These sorts of things can be super valuable because analysts have got this very broad perspective and some depth as well. The second major area, which is probably what most people see, is probably more about influence. And this is where we think about the reports that analysts write and how excited vendors are to get into them. And you see executive buyers reading these chunky reports on planes all the time, trying to figure out which ERP is better. And so the influence side, we see studies that executive buyers, CIOs, for example, tend to pay quite a lot of attention to, yes, peer groups, but absolutely to analyst commentary. Not all analysts are the same, of course. So these values vary, but I would say they're the two big things that I've always worked with analysts on. It's just, like I said, figuring out how to make my products better, my messaging better, my go-to-market better, and from the vendor side specifically, being able to have that communication, third-party authoritative communication about your solution to your buyers, which can be very positive, but is also sometimes the reason why vendors hate analysts.
Yes, yes. And I love what you said about customer, like that customer insight that your customers aren't going to tell you the bad and the ugly, but they will be asking those questions and having a good discussion with the analysts. And so analysts have a really unique perspective, customer needs, their challenges, what's working, what's not, who's buying, who's not. And even if there's confusion in the market, it's really good to understand where are they confused and how can you help them along their journey. I love that. So when you think about like startups versus enterprise vendors, how does, from your analyst lens, how does that look? How is it different?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting one. For startups, analyst world can be really difficult To start with, there's so many of them. Then there's the big ones, which are really expensive, and that can put a big dent in a startup level budget. So you've got to be very careful and surgical as a startup on how you try and extract value from analyst relations. Certainly, one part of it is getting in reports. Everyone wants to get in a report, right? And yes, for a startup to be recognized alongside a major legacy or enterprise player is a real validation of where they are in their business. So being able to work with analysts to get into reports is actually really important for a startup, and perhaps in a way that's not as important for an enterprise. Everyone knows the big players in certain sectors, so name recognition or brand recognition is not that important. But when you're a startup, it's really critical, even just to get on the shortlist, right? To get on the CIO or the VP shortlist for products in that sector when they're putting out an RFP, when they're trying to write their RFP. They'll go to analyst reports to figure out, well, what companies should I be looking at to try and figure out what features I even need, let alone who to evaluate or do a POC. So for startups, I think a lot of the value is really in that awareness side. Your engagement around product is probably more important at the enterprise level. Startups tend to have much closer connection to their customers. A startup might have 5 or 10 customers, because that's how you ramp up your business. Whereas an enterprise might have 10,000 customers and can't always hear what they're saying. And so I think for an enterprise, a lot more of the value should be around the product feedback, the market sensing, the inputs. For a startup, though, some of that, but a lot of the time the analysts won't know what you're doing as a startup because you're doing something revolutionary, different, unique, special only. And it's hard for an analyst to compare that. But if you can lead them into that understanding of why what you're doing is special and different, then analysts can really help you get recognition if you've got something that's worth recognizing. So I think that's probably the major difference I've seen with the analyst community.
Yeah, I love that perspective, because it is a different approach. If you come from enterprise, you're not going to do the same. The strategy is different. And the other thing I've seen work really well at the enterprise level is bringing together the C-suite, all the stakeholders before a big product launch or strategy, getting everyone on the same page, because the analysts force you to do that. They will call out your BS, right? Like they will call that out. So before you go to market with anything, it's a really good idea to engage with the analysts because they will force all your internal stakeholders who all have egos, we're all dealing with egos, and get them on the same page.
That is such a great point, Jen, because you're right. It's a forcing function. You've got an analyst briefing in 3 weeks' time. So product marketing's come up with a pitch and a messaging deck, but then you've got product. Analysts want to know about the product itself, how it's working. They'll also want to know about what your go-to-market looks like, because part of the analysis process is how strong is your company and how well do you integrate with partners, for example. So things like go-to-market become really important. So all of a sudden your sales and marketing leadership have to be a part of that. And for a startup, especially, but also even for an enterprise, the CEO has skin in that game. So they'll be there. And yes, you've got to be on the same page. It is the worst look ever for product and marketing to be arguing with the CEO in front of their covering analyst. Not good form.
No, that would be one of the worst. Yeah, that would be a tough one to sit through. Yeah, as an AR pro, then you have to interject cleverly, get everyone off.
Yeah. Oh, look, and by the way, a good AR rep, someone who can manage these egos as well as the technologies and the analysts. This is a super hard process, and a good AR person is going to save your bacon in those kinds of meetings for sure.
Yes, I have had to back channel and say, okay, enough. We don't have to prove our point here. It's okay. So if you think about when should you start engaging with analysts, is it ever too early or too late?
Yeah, look, you should certainly not engage with analysts as a small sort of 2-person, just getting your product ready, trying to figure out your product market fit. Most analysts will want to have some proof of execution. They will want to know that your product is worth analyzing. For an analyst to go out and look at a little startup that's doing an open source project in their spare time, they will lose their credibility if they start to talk too much about those sorts of things, because in 6 months' time, it could be completely gone. And the analyst business does not work on short timelines. Right? Analysts come out with reports once every year or 2 years on certain segments. And so you really need to be at a position where you're executing in the marketplace. You have product market fit, you have customers, you have messaging sorted out, you have a decent size of your business, you're getting revenue, you have probably good funding. I don't think you can go in with just a seed round. Very rare, unless you're an accomplished serial entrepreneur who's already excelled at multiple other startups. Very rare you should go that early, but you should definitely not leave it late. Don't leave it until you think you can pay for their services, for example. You need to be able to tell them what you're doing, regardless of whether you expect to be in a report or not be in a report or whatever, because that feedback loop becomes really important as you're starting to grow your business. Early analyst interaction can be super critical to help you make the right decisions on which markets you go after, which other vendors you might partner with, what your feature set should look like, how to message your gaps as a startup, because you will have them. So I think once you get to a sort of an A or B round, you can start to really have that execution capability that analysts are going to look. You can't just be a visionary. You've got to have some of that execution.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective. I think it's something, especially here in my area, a lot of startups popping up. Are we ready to do this? And I'm like, not yet. We've got to wait for the right time, but you don't want to wait too late because you do want the analyst to get to know you as you evolve and develop so
For
that it's not
sure.
like, oh, hey, here's a briefing and here's all the stuff. They won't remember it. Right.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about picking the right analyst. There are over 5,000, probably more than that, analysts globally. That's a lot. And there's a lot, and it's changing, right? There's a lot of analysts leaving the big three, going independent. There's a lot of different vertical analysts, boutique analysts, persona based analysts. So, how do you know which analyst to work with, and what proves an analyst actually understands the market that you're in?
Yeah, look, I mean, number one, and I guess marginally a shameless plug here is work with your AR representative who knows what that ecosystem looks like.
Yes.
We all know the big people, the Forresters, the Gartners of the world, IDC. We'd love to be in all of their reports, but they're not always the right ones for any individual company. Some of the smaller analysts in the business have immense experience and can be much more personal as well. You talk about a Gartner or a Forrester, and in any given sector, they're probably covering somewhere between 50 and 150 different vendors. Whereas if you go to a smaller analyst, they might be covering maybe 5 to 20 and have much closer personal relationships with those vendors as well. So if you can establish a good personal relationship, that's important. But, number one, ask your customers what analysts they care about. That's always a good one, right? It's something I've always advocated for, is ask your customers, who are they listening to? What analysts, what advisors? What reports do they read? What do they put credibility into? What do they not? What sort of outputs do the analysts create? And will your customers read them? Are they 52-page in-depth research reports? Are they 2 to 3 pages? Are they 1 page free available online? Think about who your customer is. What's your ideal customer profile? And then back in from there into what sort of analyst commentary they're interested in. And then you've got coverage areas. Obviously, don't work with analysts that don't cover your industry, right? Find the ones that are influencing for your industry, that are understanding the market and the demand from customers in your industry and your customer profile. So it can be a mix. It can be big and small. You might be able to go for a small analyst for a while and then I hate to say upgrade, but change up to a larger analyst. You might want to keep them both all at once. Don't shotgun the whole marketplace though either. It is very obvious from an analyst perspective when you're getting a form email from a product marketing leader that is going to 50 different firms, and you're less inclined to pay that much attention to that sort of treatment. So, lots of decision factors involved. Cost is always one of them, and the bigger ones will tend to be more expensive. But along the way, you've got to make sure that it's really focused on your customer. What are they reading? What are they interested in? What advice do they need? What segments are they in? These sorts of things. And then you're back into the right analysts.
Yeah, that's such a good perspective. Really think about the customer. And I think it's hard sometimes to get that information, but it is one of the most important parts of the analyst ecosystem is building that foundation, making sure you know what your customers are reading, who's actually credible to them, and then who do you have access to, or who do you want access to, your budget. And then I think it's looking at your business goals, right? Different analysts are going to help you with go-to-market, with sales, with thought leadership, all these things. But like you said, it's got to tie back to what are my customers reading? And
But
I
that
think
is a
that's
critical addition there, Jen. You're
yeah,
spot on. Not every business needs product help.
right.
Sometimes the product is awesome. You need go-to-market help, or you need partnership help, or maybe it's just awareness. Sometimes you desperately need product help. So that's actually a really good point too. Different analysts will give you different value in those different business areas as well. Top, really important, Jen. Good on you.
No, I love that. I love this. This is a great conversation. So let's talk about red flags. What should you watch out for? There's a lot of analyst firms. There's some credible and there's some smaller ones that sometimes it might be hard to figure out, are they influential? Do they really know their space? So how do you know? What do you watch out for?
Yeah, look, as a buyer, and I have been as recently as when I was CTO at Kumu, I was more of a buyer than I was a seller in that business. And what I was looking for in my analyst coverage, certainly coverage of what I cared about, honest and insightful coverage. So getting into features and functions and product capabilities and being able to compare, and maybe not in public, because this is something that analysts don't often do, but being able to sit in a room with them going, okay, tell me about the difference between these two. Why would this product be good for me? Why would that product be good for me? If I'm looking for some management tooling, for example, this is my ecosystem. What's going to work best for me?
Mhm.
So, and this doesn't really vary by size. Some very small, even single operator analysts get into that level of depth. Sometimes even the big analysts get into it. Sometimes they just don't. So the individual analyst you're going to work with is going to be the most important part of making that decision, I think. And if that individual analyst always talks strategically when you need to understand tactics, then that's going to be a problem. If that analyst is, how should I say, from a vendor perspective, working very closely with one of your competitors and not others, then that can be a little bit of a red flag too. Look for their published commentary, not just on their corporate website, but in this day and age, of course, look at their social media, look at the blogs that they're writing for, look at the quotes in journals, and you'll start to understand where their bias may or may not be. And sometimes the bias is towards companies or people, and sometimes it's just towards products and technologies. Sometimes analysts just love this tech, regardless of the product, right? Doesn't mean they're bad people. They just have a little bit of a blind spot because they love this tech. So look for those blind spots, look for potential signs of bias, look for where do they get published, right? If all of their reports are available on free sites, then I wonder who pays for them.
Hmm.
Is that now advertising or is their product actually worth paying for? So these are some of the red flags I look for. It doesn't mean that any particular analyst that's publishing free content or talking strategically is necessarily bad. Like we said before, it's about what your business needs. But these are some sort of red flags that would cause me at least to start looking a bit closer and figure out, is this the right relationship for me and my business?
Yeah, I think that's such great points, especially understanding the analyst bias. You would It's really hard for humans not to be biased, but understanding that will help you with your AR strategy. So let's talk about pay to play. Everyone talks about, a lot of people are like, "Oh, you just pay Gartner and you'll be top, you'll be the leader in no time," which that's not how it works. So let's talk about that. What's your perspective?
Look, it's a sticky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is is the analyst industry pay for play? Yes, but also no.
Mhm.
Look, you've got to be able to turn up. You've got to be there. It's an attention industry as much as anything else, and that it gets interpreted as pay for play. Because look, like I said before, if an analyst is from a big firm is covering 50 to 150 vendors in a sector, and look, when I was an analyst, I was covering virtualization, cloud, IT process automation. I had a couple of people on my team, but my coverage area was fundamentally like 150 different companies. How is your business going to stand out? Part of it is just being in front of the analyst all the time, but you can't have an analyst briefing every month if you're not paying them for it,
Mhm.
because they've got a lot of paying clients who want to talk to them, so they can't give it away for free. So look, you don't pay to get into a report, into a quadrant, into a wave. That's not a thing. You do pay to get attention though. And that attention can help you get recognized and understood better. And if your product is worth it, and if your company is doing well in the right ways, then that attention gets you into a report. So it's definitely not pay for play. And by the way, not discounting, some analysts will take money just to write a paper.
Right.
And that's an interesting one too, by the way. In my experience, analysts will take money to write a paper for a vendor about a topic which is sympathetic to their messaging and point of view. Typically, what that means is the analyst agrees with that already. They don't change their mind because you ask them to write a paper. You ask them to write a paper because you've already talked to them and they support what you're doing. And they're a good voice to be able to put that thought into the marketplace. So again, it's you pay, but it's not pay to play. It's there's a lot of nuance here. And I think there are probably some less scrupulous operators, mostly in individual firms and stuff, who actually do just take money to say people are awesome. I don't know those people.
Yes.
And I know a lot of analysts and
Yes.
a lot of big analysts and little analysts. And it's confusing if you're not into it. There's nuance. It's not always straightforward, but fundamentally it's not pay to play, but sometimes you got to pay.
Yeah. And I mean, the analysts, their value is their credibility. If they don't believe in it and they're changing their minds and they're inconsistent, they're not going to be vendors are going to find out really quickly. So I think you're right. I mean, it's not pay to play. It's access, right? Access to the analyst, like you said, and then having time with them so that they do understand what you're doing. Because if you're covering 150 vendors, how do you remember anyone? Honestly, like that's tough. I would remember maybe two, you know?
It's really hard. And when I was covering, I had notebooks and notebooks and notebooks. And I would, before a briefing, I'd go and look back at what I'd written before. What was their product plan? What was that? How were they different from this place? What did I think was different versus what did they think was different?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
And so this is what I mean. You got to get in front of them quite a lot because otherwise I wouldn't have had that notebook. I wouldn't have known that they were growing. I wouldn't have known that they'd added features or had a new product or so all of a sudden they're not as important or as useful or as good as they should be in my mind.
Right.
Just because I haven't had the learning of all these things.
Yeah. And I often get on inquiries with clients and the analyst will refer to, oh, I just heard there's this emerging vendor XYZ. This is what they're doing, especially with AI and everything that's going on. I've heard that over and over again. If you are consistent and they're hearing your message, they will reference you maybe in reports, but in inquiries, verbal conversations that you are not a part of. So there's a lot going on in this world, this crazy world of analyst relations.
Yep.
So let's talk about briefings. Usually you have 30 minutes with a key analyst. How do you make it count?
Oh, Jen, I think your audience is going to hate me because I'll tell you, you need max 5 slides.
Whoa.
5 slides.
That's
Do
tough.
not start with how much money your company is making. Here's one tip that I will always give everyone for analyst briefings. Don't quote other analysts. Oh my goodness.
Amen. Yes.
Oh my goodness. The number of times that vendors would come in, and I worked for a smaller firm, right? Enterprise Management Associates. They were about 20 people when I worked there. Sageable, I was by myself. And analysts would come in and they'd tell me what Gartner thought about them. I'm like, oh, mate, do not come home and tell your wife what your girlfriend thinks about you. That's not a good look. So anyway, number one tip, don't quote other analysts to your current analyst. Just don't. Be honest. Be really honest with them. This is why I say 5 slides, because you want them to talk to you as much as possible. I know a lot of marketers, especially sales leaders too, and some product people want to go and talk about how good they are. Oh, I'm so good. It's like a really bad first date. It's like you talk about yourself over and over and over and over again. And you say, so enough about me talking about me. What do you think about me?
Right. Right.
And let them have room, because that's the important part about what you're trying to do is hearing what they have to say. Look, it's important to tell them what you've done. Here's some customer success. Here's new product features. Here's the market, the TAM, the SAM that we're going after. This is why it's viable and valuable. These are the sorts of really valuable things for analysts. A lot of it they all already know, by the way, right? They look at your company before you sit down in a briefing room. They don't need to know your boilerplate. They probably don't need to know what you think your TAM and your SAM are. They work on those sorts of numbers. You often get them from the analysts. So go in there very open and honest about where you are, what you're doing, how it's working out for you, and what you want from them. And honestly, like I said, the analysts just talk and talk and talk when you let them. 5 slides. The reason I say 5 slides, by the way, I would actually like 3 as an analyst. Is because you need to have clarity in what you're saying. You need to be concise. You need to be able to say what you need to say as a vendor really quickly and concisely so that the vendor can respond, right? And you can have a conversation about it. And I think probably the last thing I add was don't be argumentative.
Yes.
Look, they might be wrong. That's okay. You might be wrong. That could also be okay.
Right. Right.
It's a sharing, it's a conversation, it's a learning experience. Sometimes you want to have an argument with an analyst. A briefing is not the right call for that. That's about helping them understand you and helping you understand them. And if you want to get into arguments and contractual problems and stuff, then your account manager's the person to talk to. Analysts themselves want to know about what you're doing, what your product is. They want to help you get better at all of the things you're doing as well. Go in with that framing, minimum slides. One of the things I learned from one of my CEOs is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and maybe we should sometimes use them in proportion. I would say that absolutely applies to an analyst briefing. Talk once, listen twice.
I like that.
And yeah, don't argue, don't quote other analysts. Be open to what they know.
Yes. Yes. And go in to the briefing to understand their perspective. Like you said, don't argue. And one of the things I tell, especially clients that have not had experience working with analysts, is don't tell them about the market. They know the market. Don't tell them 4 slides about the market. I mean, how much do you hate that? What was for you as an analyst the most valuable? Was it technical deep dives, customer conversations, going to an analyst day or an event? What kind of was the best engagement for you post briefing?
Yeah, as an analyst engaging with vendors, 2 things come to mind immediately, and there's an overlap. One is, as you say, the analyst day. That's pretty phenomenal because you get access to everyone you need to. You can talk product, marketing, go-to-market partnerships, sales, corporate strategy, M&A. You can talk and understand and learn everything about the business, not just technical product functions. And that's really important. You get to have that experience with your peer group in the room. This is an interesting corollary to the private briefing because now you've got a different dynamic. Whereas an analyst, I get to bounce ideas off other people who are doing my job and learn. I mean, and by the way, it's a very collegial industry. You think about competitors and stuff like, so Gartner and Forrester are competitors. Yes, but also no.
Right.
They are competitors, absolutely. But the individual analysts are knowledge people, in my experience. They want to learn, they want to know. They're quite happy to sit down with analysts from other businesses, from competitors, and share ideas about what they think about this product or this go-to-market or this message or whatever. So it gives a different dynamic. The third reason I really like that analyst day, and this is why it overlaps with my second choice, is you typically get to meet multiple customers and hear lots of customer stories. And as an analyst, you must do this. You can't just listen to vendors telling you how good their product is and go home and then tell your customers, CIOs, and other buyers what you heard. That's just regurgitating press releases. That's not analysis. So by talking to customers directly, listening to them on the stage when they're presenting to you about their success story, which will all be, unicorns and rainbows.
Yeah.
But then at lunchtime or afterwards or in a breakout session, being able to pepper them with real questions. Tell me about how you calculated your ROI. Why was this good for you? What was the skill set issues? Did you have compatibility issues? How did it work with integration? How long was your deployment? All the sorts of things that buyers actually want to know, I can get from talking to customers. I will just throw out a third option, by the way, the annual user group conference. So vendors often co-locate their analyst day with their user conference. So, Amazon reInvent, for example, will have a whole analyst track. That's an even better thing from an analyst because you get everything I just talked to you about, but you also get to randomly wander the floor and ask people who have no permission to speak to you about what that product is like, what this company is like, what you're doing with it. Is it good or bad? And especially when you can get to individual practitioner level as an analyst, and I always love to do that, you get unvarnished insight, which you then can use to inform your analysis of the marketplace. So they're the ones that I always found most useful as an analyst.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, at Red Hat, we would have Red Hat Summit once a year, Analyst Day track. And we had a program for them before the summit started so that they were briefed on the information and they could go ask questions, have customer conversations, talk to our partners, talk to practitioners, which I think is so important. But then also, I remember one analyst at Ansible Fest, which was a different one for our automation business. He said he loved just the welcome party because it was all the customers. Nobody knew who he was. Like you said, he got a lot of good information that was informal. I think that is so important. And they're so fun to do that way. And there's a lot more engagement.
100% agree. And I'm not sure if you were there at the time, but I actually keynoted Ansible Fest at one point many years ago. And I had exactly that experience. You think of the larger enterprise legacy, I don't like that word, traditional vendors, and a lot of the customers that are there are quite high level people. They're VPs and SVPs, they're budget owners and
Mhm.
vetoes and stuff. You go to a conference like an Ansible Fest and it's predominantly practitioners. So all of a sudden you
Yep.
get a lot of really good and unvarnished insight. Ansible Fest was actually one of my
So fun.
favorite
Oh, me
ways
too.
to get insight.
Yeah, and it's such a fun event, and I also think it's a good time for the analyst to get to know the vendor and the culture. Like, they can tell you about the culture and how great they are, but if you go to an event like this, you really feel it. And yeah, Ansible Fest was one of my favorite events.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing about the user group,
Yes.
getting live demos where you're the customer. So just going down
Oh.
to the expo floor as an analyst, so many analysts will do this, by the way. This is a tip for vendors. Always ask people to turn their pass back around. Sometimes the pass has been turned around on purpose, not on accident.
That is a great tip. Oh my, yes.
I would always go down to the expo floor and get a demo and play with it and ask the questions there. You know, you can go do a demo on a briefing. It's great, but it's arm's
Different.
length.
Mhm.
Do it in front of with an SE on the floor, for example, and you really get to understand what the product does and ask those questions and have a real product expert, like the leader of product marketing, someone in product management, someone in the software engineering division at the booth who's able to
Right.
answer your questions. That's a huge upside for an analyst to be able to do that.
I didn't know that. Okay, so let's talk about how do you change an analyst's perspective? Can you do that?
Yeah, you absolutely can.
Yeah.
It's not always easy. Most analysts form their own perspectives through multiple channels and months or even years of insight. Talking to customers, talking to your partners, talking to your competitors, talking to your employees, sometimes using and installing and testing your product. They form these opinions probably mostly slowly and methodically. This is how you have to reverse their decisions and their thoughts, slowly and methodically. The best way to start is by showing them what customers think. You'll always have good customers. If you can get a good customer to tell their story to an analyst, that's a great way to start to reverse any negativity they've got. Because that's one of the most credible ways that an analyst can understand what you are and who you are and what you're doing is asking your customer, why did you choose this? Why did you not choose this other one that I like better?
Right.
Are these features and functions not important to you? Or was there something special there? Was there a relationship? Was it integration? Getting that thing to change their mind means giving them the information they need to change their mind. So
Hmm.
starting with a customer story and ideally making a customer or two available to that analyst so they can talk directly and honestly and openly about what's good. That starts to change the game. The second thing is consistency and cadence. Have a regular conversation with analysts, especially analysts that aren't necessarily in your corner, to let them know what you're improving. Take down from their conversation what they think is wrong. And most analysts, it's not a personal thing. They just think, you don't have these two features. You don't integrate easily with this. Your product's too hard to use. My research has shown that you have a long deployment cycle and low ROI. These sorts of things. Understand exactly what the analysts are knocking you for, and then get back to them frequently with a cadence, showing that you're getting better. We think about some of these big reports, and one of the axes is ability to execute.
Right.
I think we all know who we're talking about. Show them you can execute by executing with them. And every time come back with a new customer, a new product story, a new feature release. Continue to show execution with a cadence. The other axis that we think about a lot is vision. Vertical. And
Yeah.
again, I think we know who we're talking about. Come back and show them that you've got vision. And then with these cadences, show them you're executing on your vision. If the vision's no good, listen to them and change the vision. If you think it's appropriate,
Right.
analysts are not the boss of you, but maybe they have something valuable to take on board.
Right.
So I would say that is the best way to get back. Build the relationship. Yes, look, invite them to user group, invite them to an offsite. The analysts are people as well. You like people who like you.
Right.
Read some Carnegie and understand that people are human. Analysts are humans, and it's hard to be super angry at someone about a product when you enjoy their company at dinner. That's not going to get you into the right report, but having a relationship is actually really important.
Yes.
But the best way to establish that relationship is with those cadence meetings.
Yes, absolutely agree with you 100%. And using the customers as your key validation points and um, showing them, right? Spot on. I think that's just great advice. Let's talk about you were a CTO. Can you talk a little bit about when you think about budget approval for analyst relations, working with a new analyst or getting something out the door? How do you sell that internally? How do you get budget? What actually works with the C suite?
Yeah, look, it's a project plan and planned approvals and stuff like any other spend is, and you've got to have your business plan down pat. Sometimes the numbers are big, right? If you want to go and exhibit at IT Expo Symposium, oof, that's a cost,
Mhm.
a significant cost. If you just want to have a one briefing every quarter, that could be less. So you need to understand what are you trying to get out of it to start with, and what it's going to cost you. It's a business plan. Um, so look at the outcomes. Look at the outcomes in terms of what your sales leaders want, what your marketing leaders want, what your product leaders want. Look at the access you're going to get from the spend. Most analysts restrict you by seat. So only one person at a time. If you pay for two people can talk, specific people. So look at what you really need. Do product leaders need access or not? Maybe in a large enterprise, your product is awesome and you've got 1,000 customers already. What you really need help with is go to market and messaging or maybe partnerships. So maybe your product leader doesn't need a seat. So be realistic about the costs you're spending. Be realistic about the impact you're going to get. So measure things like engagement and awareness, potential influence on buyers. Look at significant customer spend and ask them about the analysts that they read and use that as part of your proposal. Look at how much have analysts helped you in the past. So for one example is you might want to just get a small spend for a small analyst to write a white paper for you, but you put it on your website and that's the most downloaded article you've got. So that's killer ROI. So as with everything, it is a business plan. C-suite executives will look at that number and freak out,
Right.
especially when you're talking about the big three. They're not cheap.
Mm-mm.
And so you look at that and it's like, whoa, what are we getting out of this? So make sure you have that documented. In the past, we have been able to get these three product features into our product based on analyst response, and they have raised our NPS by 3 points or 10 points or whatever it might be. So bring data, use your research, your customer research, market research, and product research, and bring that to the C-suite as justification because it's got to be a business decision. And maybe sometimes that'll point you to a different analyst than you were thinking of even. And so work with your C-suite leaders on what is going to be the best thing. But you've got to bring that data on what you need, how it's impactful to the business strategy, and what it's going to cost, and therefore what your ROI is going to be. Like any business plan, you've got to have the return on investment there.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thinking of it like a business plan, having the data. That's so smart. Such good insight into how to have that conversation at the high level. I think that's one of the hardest things for AR people is to show that impact and then get more budget or justify that with the right data and the right information and having those conversations. It's a little bit different than just working with the analyst, but that's really, really great advice. Final question. Let's talk about AI. AI is everywhere. How is that changing both how the analysts work and how AR teams should operate from your perspective?
Yeah, look, AI is changing so many things, and especially content creation. When you think about the analyst job, there's sort of two parts of it. One is understanding, sensing, learning. The other one is communicating back out. And so for the communicating back outside, it's certainly very beneficial, Gen AI specifically, because it will help analysts create more content. And, for want of a better term, content is king. You're going to have to put out content as an analyst. So the more you can put out, the more your word gets out there, the more as an analyst you are read and become valuable in your own role. So that's really important. It's also important in market sensing because it gives you a way to summarize things like a pitch deck, a messaging deck. You think about a keynote deck, 50 slides given over 2 hours, and all of a sudden an analyst has got to try and summarize that into like a paragraph that day. So you've got to be able to get that in and work with it. That said, there's a lot of stuff that, especially Gen AI, and I won't get into agentic AI, we're a little bit early, I think, on that, but Gen AI is fundamentally about regurgitating known knowns. It's about reusing known patterns of language to construct new sentences and words and paragraphs. So if something didn't exist or doesn't exist, then Gen AI is not going to be able to help you. So for an analyst, they're still going to have to work. And it's still going to be able to provide value, especially to buyers in innovative segments. Look, if you're looking for ERP insight, then perhaps Gen AI and LLMs can give you pretty good understanding of what's going on there. If you're looking for insight into developments in, say, AI, ironically, AI is probably not going to help because what's happening in AI is brand new.
Yep.
And so it's not already coded into the training models and LLMs and other things that AI is using to create its own content. So AI is going to change a lot. I would advise vendors definitely look for analysts that are using AI responsibly. Not just using it to generate a whole report, but using it to help understand nuance or difference at a deep level that they possibly can't do for 150 different vendors at one time, but not using AI to create thoughts and insights. That's their job, and they should be really good at it.
Great perspective. I think it's going to keep evolving. I guess we'll see what happens in the next few years, even in 6 months, right? It's going to be
So
changes
fast
fast.
moving, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so fast. Well, this has been great. Let's do a quick fire round and then we can wrap up. All right.
Yes. Okay.
I'm going to shoot off some questions and whatever comes to mind.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. When to start with analysts?
Start early, but only once you've got customers and product market fit.
One thing you must do in every briefing.
Reiterate your core value proposition compared to your competitors. Unique, special only.
Biggest red flag in analyst relationships.
When they ask you for money, analysts shouldn't really ask you for money. That's an account manager's job.
Yes, I agree. And it's annoying as an AR person when they do ask you for money. You're like, nope, not you. Most undervalued AR activity.
Most undervalued AR activity. Oh, that's a good one. Honestly, briefings. I think people value user groups and in-person and off-sites and stuff, but a lot of vendors don't value the briefing the way they should. And so they go in haphazardly, unprepared. I'm going to say briefings.
Briefings. Okay. Best argument for AR budget.
Customers want validation. They don't necessarily always use analysts to decide, but they, a VP of whatever needs to be able to go to their C-level and say, oh, but here's my analysis, but also experts agree with me.
Yes. Okay, last one. One AI move to make this year.
I would, especially if I was a buyer, I would use AI. I would feed analyst reports into it to get summaries if I'm looking to buy in a specific product area. If I'm a vendor, I am feeding my competitors' reports and white papers and stuff into an AI, into an LLM, so I can understand how I am different and how I can message that.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I like the ending on that. Andy, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having a great conversation about all things analyst relations, and AI. If you're looking to turn analyst engagement into business impact, you can visit hmh-marketing.com or send me an email. I'll have it pop up here. But Andy, I want to thank you again for a great conversation. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. And I hope I see you again soon.
Thank you, Jen. It's a privilege to talk with you about this stuff. I hope it's helpful for your audience. And yeah, have a great summer. We'll catch up soon. Cheers.
Bye.